Shabbat Shalom, everyone. So this morning, I would like to talk a little bit about miracles. Okay? Let's talk about miracles. What is the Jewish perspective on miracles? Somebody came up and asked you, so what do Jews say? What's the Jewish perspective? Do Jews believe in miracles? Yes, miracles are signs from God. What else?
We don't rely on them.
We don't rely on them. We believe in them, but we don't rely on them. Good. What else?
I don't know if there's a classification of minor miracles and major miracles.
Okay.
What we're about to read about the major miracles, those are built into the design of the world.
Good. So Mike is saying that there may be sort of a classification of what he would call minor miracles and major miracles, right? Where the ones we're going to read about today, and we will continue to read about throughout the book of Exodus, frankly, we were reading about some of those in the book of Genesis as well, are some of these major miracles, right? We've got burning bushes and splitting seas and plagues and all sorts of things that are pretty big deals, right? That are pretty big deals. And then yet, at the same time, there may be other types of miracles that are smaller, that are more discreet, but miraculous just the same. Okay?
I think kind of leaning in, like your favorite phrase,
Uh-huh.
leaning into what Mike said. I think there are also like personal miracles and then maybe global miracles.
Good. So, Diana is saying, leaning into that, yes, is that there are personal miracles and global miracles, right? That there are miracles that are just about me, right? And what happened to me. I mean, when I was a teenager in high school, I got my driver's license. I was 16 years old. Within the first 3 weeks, I got into a car accident, as unfortunately many of our teens do. And I was in a little four-door Chevy Chevette. I don't know if any of you remember those little cars. I don't like to make that, I wasn't the most popular kid on campus with a little Chevy Chevette, that's for sure. And I decided to tangle with a one-ton pickup truck. And I remember calling my mom to come down and get me because my car was inoperable, was not working. And I remember seeing her face when she saw the car, right? And her face just turned white. And she said, "It's a miracle you got out of there." Okay, that's a personal miracle, right? That's a personal miracle. Versus what we're talking about, global miracles, perhaps. So I'm getting, Mark?
I gotta go back to something that Diana said.
Go ahead, please.
You said we believe in them, but we don't rely on them.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, the whole purpose, at least the biblical miracles, is we're supposed to rely on them, but we didn't, for whatever reason, skepticism or whatever, we don't rely on them. And that was the whole point, that saying there's a miracle. This means we should, believe in a greater force, or someone's going to help us.
Right.
But then we turn against it, or we don't believe it.
So I think what Diana was saying, I hear I agree with what you're saying. I think what Diana's saying, which is very much a Jewish idea, is we don't live our lives waiting for a miracle. That's what I think you were saying in terms of relying on them.
In other words, you don't drive through the red light hoping that, there's going to be a miracle and
Right.
the truck isn't going to crash into me.
Right. Or, as there are denominations of Christianity, Christian Science in particular, who will say, like, we don't believe in medical science because we are going to depend on God, right? That's a very different mindset of we're relying now on God's miracle as opposed to doing what we need to do first. And then if God's miracle comes, we accept it, right? We accept it.
Almost like I
Right. And to some degree it is.
But
But
still, they've done things, whatever.
correct. The miracle, by the way, can incorporate human beings as well, and us being part of that miracle, right? So I want to look today, to this week's Parsha, we start the plagues. But I actually want to look before the plagues, because the idea of the power of a miracle actually takes place even before the plagues start. And it takes place in those conversations that Moshe has with Paro, with Pharaoh. And specifically, if we look at chapter 7, which is where we're going to start today, you can find it on page 356 and 357. The chapter begins, we're actually going to start on verse 8, which is what I want to look at, but the chapter begins with God saying to Moses, I placed you in the role of God to Pharaoh with your brother Abraham as your prophet. You're going to be my representative, right? You're going to repeat all that I command you, and your brother shall speak to Pharaoh and to the Israelites, but I will harden Pharaoh's heart that I may multiply my signs and my marvels, right? I'm going to harden Pharaoh's heart so that I can multiply my miracles. So we'll come back to that in a second. But let's go down to verse 8. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, when Pharaoh speaks to you and says, produce your miracle. I'm translating the word here, it's from marvel to miracle. It's the same Hebrew word. You shall say to Aaron, take your rod, cast it down before Pharaoh, and it shall turn into a serpent. Actually, there's a whole conversation because there's two different times when the rod is cast down, one for the Israelites and one for Pharaoh. And when it happens for the Israelite, the Hebrew word that is used is nachash, which is a serpent. But the Hebrew word that's used here is tanin. Tanin. Some people will translate it as a dragon, but it's probably more of a crocodile, right? And that's actually what's going on here in this case. And it makes sense because crocodile was one of those mythic beasts of the Egyptian theology, right? They didn't know necessarily from serpents, but they knew much more from crocodiles. I think they knew from serpents too, but that's at least what the commentators say. So it shall turn into serpents. So Moses and Aaron came before Pharaoh and did just as the Lord has commanded. Aaron cast down in the presence of Pharaoh in his courtyards, and it turned into a serpent. Then Pharaoh, for his part, summoned the wise men and the sorcerers and the Egyptian magicians. In turn, did the same thing with their spells. Each cast down his rod, and they turned into serpents, but Aaron's rod swallowed their rods. So that is this miracle, this back and forth, right? We have the staff that gets thrown down and turns into a serpent or a crocodile or whatever, dragon, whatever it happens to be. And Pharaoh calls his magicians, and they do the same thing. And then Aaron's rod swallows up the other ones. All right, so what do we learn from this, and how do we as Jews deal with this from a theological perspective? Because there's all sorts of issues for me. It's like, wait a second, if this is supposedly a miracle of God, how are these sorcerers and magicians that it's not supposed to be working anyway, how are they doing it? Right? How are they doing it? So what do we make from all of this? How do we make sense of this for us? Go ahead, Dana.
I think a lot of it is I was talking sort of about that global issue about miracles. A lot of it is really perspective and perception, and also like their lived experience, what they are used to. And here you had these Egyptians, and they already had their, I don't know if it was an empire, their society. They had trained magicians, trained in these kinds of things. Their David Copperfields, if you will.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then the Israelites, who were, it's kind of their first rodeo at this. They had actually seen things that they know they didn't do, like the manna, like the Hananei Hakavos, paths of glory, like these wells that popped up everywhere. So,
Well, that'll be later, but yes,
you're right.
right? Because that'll be later on. But yeah, I mean, look, and I will get back to that, this idea that magic and these sorts of things was not unfamiliar in Egypt, right? It was not unfamiliar in Egypt, and I'll come back to that in a second. Marge.
Maybe it's the concept of, okay, if it starts out with what everyone can kind of do, but then moves on
Right.
to what they can't do.
Correct.
If it started with a huge amount, it might not have the same impact as, okay, we all can do this, we all can do that, but then we all can't do this.
I like that, Marge. So Marge is saying that perhaps these all start out with the things that everyone can do, right? The more common acts. And we see that, by the way, right? We see not only with this, but the first plague, we see the same thing, right? Where Moses turns the water into blood, the Nile into blood, and the Egyptian magicians do the same thing, right? And they are able to turn water into blood, and therefore, it can be dismissed. But as the plagues start to proceed, the Egyptian magicians are no longer as powerful, right? Are no longer as powerful, and it shows ultimately that God is more powerful, right? God's miracles are stronger than the miracles that are there.
And actually, if the part of the point of all this is to stiffen Pharaoh's heart, that's how you would do it. Is make them make the power seem equal, so it's like, well, I'm not listening to you. And then over time, you kind of break down that person's resolve.
Right. Right. Yeah. It doesn't take a lot to stiffen Pharaoh's heart when his own people can do the same thing. Right. It takes much more later on when they finally can't. Okay. Anybody else? All right. So I'm going to do something that we do in the Midrash a lot, where I'm going to jump to the end text, and then kind of we want to work our way back to why is this text relevant, right? Why is this text relevant? There is a text in the Gemara in Menachot 85a that reads as follows. Yochana and Mamre, who apparently were the Egyptian sorcerers, right? Somehow the Babylonian Talmud got the names of the Egyptian sorcerers, and they are Yochana and Mamre. They said to Moses, as he was performing his sign in Egypt, he says, "Are you going to bring straw to Aphoraim?" All right, what does that mean? What do you mean, are you going to bring straw to Aphoraim? It's actually the same exact idea, for those who know this phrase, are you going to bring coal to Newcastle? Right? Anybody familiar with that? No? Oh my goodness. All right. Newcastle was known for coal, right? That's what they produced. So you don't bring coal to Newcastle. Aphoraim was known for straw and flour. So they're saying to him, you're bringing these tricks? We do that here. That's what we do here. We've got these tricks. You've got these tricks. Why are you bringing straw to Aphoraim? Why are you doing this here? This is nothing. You better come up with something different. Right? Now, what's interesting is that the Midrash in Shemot Rabbah ends there. But the Gemara, this text actually goes on and gives Moses a response. And Moses said to them in reply, "People say, to a place of vegetables, take your vegetables to sell." What does that mean? Rashi picks up on it also, because Rashi knows this text and brings it back into his interpretation of our text here. To a place of vegetables, take your vegetables to sell. Well, there are two different possible explanations that Rashi brings, right? One is, well, if you want to sell vegetables, you're going to take it to a place that is known for selling vegetables, because that's where your customers are going to be, right? That's where people are going to gather to buy vegetables, right? If I want to buy fresh vegetables, I'm going to go to a farmer's market, I'm not going to go down to on Miramar Road where all the car places are. Makes no sense. So I'm going to go to the place where they're selling vegetables. So that's number one. But number two, which I think brings us back to our topic, is if this is how they understand the world, you have to respond to them. You have to start by speaking their language. And what Moses was saying by this response is, yeah, I know you guys are all into this magic stuff. That's why we're going to undo that. Right? We're going to respond specifically to what it is that you are saying. We're not going to hide from it. We're not going to go, you want to have that conversation? Let's have that conversation. And let us show the truth. And to some degree, I think that's what's going on in this text, and it's bold, and it takes a certain amount of courage to sort of go there and say, look, I am dealing with a world that is completely against me right now. I'm going into Pharaoh's court, and I'm going to try and play based on Pharaoh's game. But ultimately, it's the only way to win. Because Pharaoh's not going to be convinced with anything differently. And I was thinking about this, and Rabbi Ern and I were discussing it earlier. I was thinking about this specifically in reference to this week. I've been really struggling with whether or not it was a good idea or a bad idea, Israel's decision to go and deal with this court case at The Hague, right? We're going to a place that is against Israel, has always been against Israel, and we're trying to fight against that. And as I read this week, it sort of said to me, well, look, if you want to sell vegetables, you got to go to a place to sell vegetables, right? If you want to make an argument for why it is that Israel is doing what it is doing and the legitimacy of that, you ultimately need to go to Pharaoh's palace and say, all right, here it is. Here it is. And it's scary, and it's bold, and it's all of those things that we talk about that I'm sure Moshe felt, but it's necessary. It's necessary. And we know from this story, it didn't work out well in the beginning. It didn't work out well in the beginning. Because Pharaoh's response was, what? I'm going to make your labor even harder. And it took time. And it took effort. And it took a lot of courage on not only Moshe and Aaron, but on the Israelites to see it through. But ultimately they did. And this parashat gives me then a little bit of hope and a little bit of sustenance as I look at the world and we continue to hear about anti-Semitism. We continue to see all of these sorts of things, whether it be South Africa coming and doing this and Turkey saying that they're going to help, and all the pieces are sort of being lined up right now. But it's important. It's important to say, if you're going to make this claim, let's have that conversation. Let's talk about truth. Let's talk about reality and bring that. Any comments or questions before we go? Yeah.
I had just one other quick comment besides my original ones. We don't rely on them, but we're also commanded, it's a mitzvah, pirsum hanes, to actually publicize these miracles.
In certain circumstances, yes.
Like for Hanukkah, for example, the reason we have the Hanukkah in the window or outside, wherever, and like all over social media, even if you will.
Yeah.
About pirsum hanes. So we continue to work on that and show the world that miracles can happen, while at the same time we don't rely on them. So
Right.
it's kind of a crazy.
We don't wait for them. We don't live our life waiting for miracles.
Right.
And by the way, we even see that just with the big miracles, right? When we get to the Red Sea, which is, a few more weeks down the road, When we get to the Red Sea, the children of Israel are crying and wailing because the Egyptians are bearing down on them. And what does God ultimately say? What are you standing here for? Go. Right? Move. And so we see that is a part of who we are. We don't wait for miracles. We don't just rely on miracles. We get up and we move. At the same time, we acknowledge them. And what you were saying, Diana, is, especially for Hanukkah, right, we have the commandment to publicize the miracle, to say, wait a second, this is something that people need to know. And that's a part of this dynamic as well. It's a little different from what's going on here right now. It's sort of the next step down the road with the bigger miracles. Any other comments or questions?